Hello and welcome to Building Success for Students with Autism. My name is Megan Trowbridge and I am the Autism Low Incidence Consultant with Region 14 State Support Team. Today we're going to be looking at 5 different characteristics of autism, including sensory, executive functioning, communication, emotional regulation, and anxiety. We're going to look at that in the lens of your classroom. What are some of the common problems that you see in the classroom in each of those areas? And then on the flip side, we are going to look at strategies and ideas that you can use within your classroom for those students in order to build your toolbox. You should also have been given today a Google Doc. It might have been printed or you might have it up on your screen, and that Google Doc has the 5 areas listed on it as well. And under each of the 5 areas are links. And each of those links has additional resources for some of the videos that we were watching and some of the strategies that we will be discussing today. And then there's also a notes section so that you can jot down any of the characteristics that you see and maybe a couple strategies that you would like to try. The idea today is not to take every single strategy and implement them into your classroom. The idea is to pick 1 or 2 that you match with a particular student that you might have in your classroom and then give it a try. Again, we're not expecting you to try all of these because I'm going to probably go around 50 strategies today very quickly. So just take a moment, jot down a few notes, and at the end, we're going to look at making some commitments. The first characteristic that I would like to address are the sensory differences that students with autism may experience. And so when we think about sensory, we think about touch, taste, sounds, but there are actually 8 different sensory systems that may affect a student with autism. There's a book that you have linked within your agenda, and it's called Asperger Syndrome and Sensory Issues, Practical Solutions for Making Sense of the World. And they have within the book, I love the book, it's great, has lots of great ideas specifically directed towards sensory differences, but they have something in there called the sensory gang, and that's who you see at the bottom of this slide. And so within the sensory gang, let's just talk about real briefly what these different sensory systems are. The first one is visual, so obviously anything that is coming through sight, such as color, contrast, lines, shapes, forms of movements, those are all things that we use with our visual sense. Next, we have something that is actually kind of new within the past few years, and something called interoception. And this is a sense of understanding what's going on inside your body. And so sometimes our students with autism, they feel something, but they don't know why they're feeling it. So an example would be maybe that their stomach hurts, but why is their stomach hurting? They may not understand the function of their stomach and why it might be hurting. So is it because they're thirsty or they're hungry or they're sick or maybe they're feeling anxious? They're not able to discern why their stomach feels hurtful. And so they might think that they're actually just sick when in reality they might be anxious or hungry. Next we have our yellow guy there is Mr. Auditory. So it's anything that you are hearing such as tone, pitch, rhythm, sequence of sounds, and be able to discern what to do with that sound. Next, we have our green guy is Mr. Vestibular, and that is our balance. So he knows that everything is right with the world. Because of him, you can deal with gravity, you can deal with movement, you can do speed, you can do stairs. So it's just that sense of balance with vestibular. Our purple person here is called Miss Tactile, and obviously this is our touch. What do we feel inside our mouths? What do we feel with our hands? Our feet, is it soft? Is it sharp? Is it dull? Is it vibrating? And what do we do with it? Our next one is Mr. Olfactory. And so this is our sense of smell. And it's basically, anything that you smell as an odor, whether it's sweet, sour, you can smell all of that with your nose. And then also thinking about how do you respond with that odor? Is it something you turn away from or is it something that you seek? Our next person is Mr. Gustatory, and so this is again that taste of is it spicy, is it sweet, and is it something that we might crave later on? And then our last little guy there, pumping weights, that's Ms. Proprioception, and this is our muscle control. So it's information coming from your joints and your muscles and your tendons that help you adjust your position and also having smooth movements that make you just feel just right. So think about sitting in a chair. Is it too hard or is it too soft? Think about when you're sleeping at night. Is your pillow in the right spot? So these are just, a quick summary of the different sensory senses that we might have. But then what are the problems that you see in your classroom? And so we have three. Sensory overresponsivity. These are individuals with sensory, they are more sensitive to sensory stimulation than most people. Their bodies feel sensations too easily or too intensely, and they might feel as if they are being constantly bombarded with information. Consequently, these people have a fight or flight response when they have this sensation, such as being touched unexpectedly or a loud noise or a condition called sensory defensiveness. They may try to avoid or minimize sensations such as withdrawing from touch or covering their ears when things are too loud. Think about those students in your classroom who might scream even though you just tap them on the shoulder. They might be over responding to that sensory stimuli. Sensory under-responsivity are individuals who are under-responsive to sensory stimuli and are often quiet and passive. They disregard or do not respond to stimuli in the usual intensity available in their sensory environment. They may appear withdrawn, difficult to engage, or self-absorbed because they don't understand the sensory that's going on around them. They don't hear it, they don't feel it, they don't see it, they don't smell it. They understand responsivity to tactile and deep pressure input may lead to poor body awareness, clumsiness, and movements that are not graded appropriately for them. They may not perceive objects that are too hot or too cold, or they may not notice pain in a response to bumps, falls, cuts, or scrapes. I mean, I had a student in my class who bumped a desk one day, and I asked him if he was okay, and he said yes. The next day he came home or came back to school, and he had a huge bruise. And his mom asked me what happened, and I said, well, I know he ran into a desk, but I didn't realize it was that bad. It's because he had that under responsivity to something that would have caused a typical person a lot of pain. And their last problem is sensory craving. These are individuals with this pattern. They actively seek or crave sensory stimulation and seem to have an almost insatiable desire for sensory input. They're seeking it out all the time. They tend to be constantly moving, crashing, jumping, bumping into things. They may need to touch everything and be overly affectionate, not understanding what their space is versus another's because all they know is they want that sensory input. A key factor to sensory craving is that when the individual receives more input, it doesn't regulate them. So even though they ran into something or they crashed into something, it hasn't satisfied their need. And so think about some of our students who are self-injurious, who hit themselves. That their sensory craving at that moment. And because they continue hitting themselves, it means it's not meeting their need. And so what do we do about these problems with sensory? And to me, sensory is one of the hardest things to work with a student with autism, because oftentimes they can't explain to me or to you why they're doing what they're doing because they don't understand their body well enough. All they know is it's too loud or it's too bright in here. And so, sometimes they can't even communicate that. So some solutions and anything when we're talking about sensory, I always encourage you to work with your occupational therapist who has had very specific training in sensory differences, is to encourage students to maybe wear headphones. And again, headphones come in all shapes, sizes, modalities. So you might have to do some trial and error. Do they want in-ear headphones? Do they want over-ear headphones, noise canceling? Weighted blankets or vests. Again, those are things that you want to definitely talk through with someone about, because if you leave a vest on too long or a weighted blanket on too long throughout the day, it loses its effectiveness. And so you want to make sure that you're definitely working with someone who can prescribe how long or how heavy these blankets and vests should be used. And you can take a sensory walk. There are lots of great YouTube videos out there. And if you just Google the Edutopia, things like that, they have some wonderful ideas on sensory walks. And you're going to see one in a video here in just a little bit on what a sensory walk will look like. Going to a sensory room. Again, this has got to be structured and created with an occupational therapist. Sensory rooms are wonderful places for our students to go, especially maybe before a stressful event might be occurring, such as maybe an assembly. It might be a good place for them to go to get themselves settled. It can be a great place to go calm a student as well who might be ramped up. Not to be used as punishment, but as a place where they're going to perform some very prescribed activities to get their body ready for learning. And again, the video we're going to watch in just a minute is going to show you a sensory room and how it's going to be used. And then providing those sensory breaks throughout the day. So again, those sensory breaks can be incorporated with something called home base that we'll talk about here in a little bit. They can be incorporated within the classroom. The student doesn't have to leave the classroom to do a sensory break. When I was in the classroom, I had a sensory wall right outside my classroom door that I could stand in the doorway and watch the student perform a few tasks along the wall. Would take a minute or two, get them resettled, and bring them right back into the classroom. So again, we're going to watch a video here in just a moment about a sensory room. I know you're thinking, oh, there's no way we could have that at our school, or maybe we have something similar, but wow, that's a lot of stuff. A sensory room does not have to look like this, okay? They can be very, very simple. Just make sure that if you're using a sensory room that it is, it's not a free for all. The student doesn't go in there and just play. It is going to be set up so that a student has anywhere from like 2 to 4 to 5 tasks that they're going to complete in order to get their body ready to learn.
Research shows that if the student's in the right mindset and they get their sensory needs met, they're going to be much better learners.
Hands to your heart space. Take a deep breath in.
The sensory room is probably my most important piece of the day. Students go to the sensory room in order to calm their bodies and get all the emotions out and stabilize themselves so they're ready to learn and they're happy.
When we designed the sensory room, we actually took the entire room apart. We carpeted the floor so that we could absorb some of the sound. We put the shades on the ceiling to change the light. So when they walk in that room, they feel the change.
My class specifically, we utilize the room once a day for a 30-minute break.
First thing that they do is go on the ball and they bounce to a metronome. It's really a way to ground them into the space and give them some sensory input before we have them go out into the room.
We're going to do our rotation now, okay?
So there's different stations in the sensory room, and some of my students love specific stations. One in particular loves the punching bag and the ropes. He's able to get all that anger and frustration out, so that calms him down. Whereas another student, I know he needs calming movements, so he's on the swing going back and forth.
Another area in the room is the crash pad. You will see students that have sensory issues bump into walls, bang their head. So what we've created is a safe space to crash into. And then there's the light wall. You could use your hands, you could use your feet. There's different games that are programmed on there.
Yes, good girl.
We also work on balance and coordination. The walking path works on all of those, and they have to right themselves, correct their body in space. We have 10-pound slam balls. Some students just need to come in, pick something heavy up and throw it. That's the essence of a sensory room. You're putting materials in there that are appropriate, so a student's not throwing a chair. And at the end, when they finish with their stations, they lay on the floor and they're squished. So everything that we do in there is predictable. There's a set sequence.
We're all done with sensory room. We're going to walk back to our class.
So after the sensory room, they're able to focus more. They're quieter and their hands are to themselves and they're able to listen to my directions. We're here, we came from the sensory room, we're ready to learn.
How does the sensory room make you feel?
Happy.
The second characteristic that we are going to look at is executive functioning. This refers to a person's ability to process information, and it includes skills such as organizing, planning, paying attention, and inhibiting inappropriate responses. Many people with autism have difficulty with executive functioning. Actually, around probably 80% is what the research is showing. They may have trouble with certain skills like planning, staying organized, sequencing information, and self-regulating emotions. Some people pay attention to minor details, but then have trouble seeing these details fit into a bigger picture. Others have trouble maintaining their attention in the classroom or in other settings. When preparing to do a task, some may find it hard to organize their thoughts and actions in order to figure out what sequence of steps are needed. And it can also lead to poor impulse control. And you can see these are some of the common problems that you may see in a classroom if you have a student with autism. Sometimes it's moving from room to room with those transition periods. It could be even moving within activities in the classroom. Again, that you see the organizing of backpacks and desks, not being able to go with the flow and those unpredictable routines. And so what are some of the solutions that we can look at? Some of those solutions include avoiding rushing that student. And you can do that by providing timers, giving them those reminders of a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We also look at peer supports. Peers are a wonderful tool to use within the classroom. If you see a student struggling, have a peer instead of yourself going over and giving them those instructions. You can always modify those assignments by reducing the number of problems or changing short answers to true, false, or multiple choice. And then that task analysis, really looking at how to break down a routine into its individual steps, almost like a checklist that the student can check off so that they know that they've completed a task. Social narratives or social stories are another great tool to use, especially in unpredictable situations. So maybe you're getting ready to go on a field trip or to an assembly and the student's never been there before or has participated in an assembly. You could use a social narrative or a social story in order to communicate expectations before they go. Labeling the environment is something that preschool and kindergarten seems to do really well, but let's think about beyond those early levels and think about, when you enter a classroom for the first time, how do I know where my cubby is? How do I know where my locker is? How do I know where to turn in assignments or where to sharpen my pencil? You can label that environment for your students that they know exactly where things go or where they are expected to be. Visual schedules are something that we'll talk about more also within our communication characteristic, but just having a plan for the day that the student can look at. And again, it doesn't have to be visual with pictures. A lot of our students with autism read, and so let's use those words and write out an individual schedule for them daily. Priming a student for a change or using a change in routine card are a great idea so that they know that something is coming up that is not expected or maybe in their schedule. Building in relaxation also kind of goes along with home base if you choose to use it. After something that might be stressful for a student, learning some new concepts or a new content, you might want to give them that relaxation break afterwards. And this is not something that has to take place outside the classroom, maybe in a sensory room or something. It could be within the classroom. It could be at their desk. But that's where home base comes into play. Home base is an area within the classroom that has a toolbox for the student of maybe some sensory items or activities that they enjoy. Maybe it's putting together a puzzle or listening to music. And it's a designated area for that student to relax in. These are not areas where students are sent to do work or as a punishment. It is simply an area for a student to collect themselves. So again, home base is one of those links that you can look at within that Google Doc. We have emergency kits that we talk about. So if you see a student who is starting to ramp up, use that emergency kit of tools that could calm them down, whether it's a fidget or some music or a crossword puzzle or a coloring page. Have those kits ready to go for students for when they become frustrated. And then the last one is just having lists and reminders. I know personally, I cannot live without my Google Calendar and my cell phone. Without that, I would not know what my day is. And so some of our students need those tools as well, whether it's a written schedule, whether they are written reminders. I mean, if you saw my computer right now, you'd see Post-it notes all over it because I'm a Post-it note gal. Anytime I need to remember something, I write it down and I post it in a location where I know I'm going to see it. So again, executive functioning, it's really that organization of the brain and how to, organize an activity within your brain in order to complete it. And this is an area that, again, many students with autism struggle. Next, we're going to talk about communication. Children with autism may have difficulty developing language skills and understanding what others say to them. This is known as the expressive or receptive language. They also often have difficulty communicating nonverbally, such as through hand gestures, eye contact, and facial expressions. The ability of children with autism to communicate and use language depends on their intellectual and social development. Some children with autism may not be able to communicate using speech or language, and some may have very limited speaking skills. Others may have very rich vocabularies and be able to talk about specific subjects in great detail. Many have problems with the meaning and rhythm of words and sentences. They also may be unable to understand body language and the meanings of different vocal tones. Taken together, these difficulties affect the ability of children with autism to interact with others, especially people their own age. So some of the things that we do see with students with autism and communication is repetitive or rigid language. They may not understand what the meanings of words are. They may not have a lot of inflection in their voice. They may continually repeat words that he or she has heard, a condition known as echolalia. We also want to look at narrow interest and exceptional ability. Some children may be able to deliver an in-depth monologue about a topic that holds their interest, even though they may not be able to carry on a two-way conversation about the exact same topic. Others may have musical talents or an advanced ability to count and do math calculations. Approximately 10% of children with autism show savant skills, extremely high abilities in specific areas such as memorization, calendar calculation, music, or math. They may also have uneven language development. Many children with autism develop some speech and language skills, but not in a normal level of ability, and their progress is usually uneven. For example, they may develop a strong vocabulary in a particular area of interest very quickly. Many children have good memories for information just heard or seen. Some may be able to read words before age 5, but may not comprehend what they have just read. They often do not respond to the speech of others and may not recognize or respond to their own names. As a result, these children are sometimes mistakenly thought to have a hearing impairment. We also have those poor nonverbal conversational skills. Children with autism are often unable to use gestures, such as pointing to an object to give meaning to their speech. They often avoid eye contact, which can make them seem rude, uninterested, or inattentive. Without meaningful gestures or other nonverbal skills to enhance their oral language skills, many students with autism become very frustrated in their attempts to make their feelings, thoughts, and needs known. This is where we can see some challenging behaviors come up. They may act out their frustrations through vocal outbursts or other inappropriate behaviors. And so some of those problems that you see in your classroom is that literalness, also those social interactions with other students or peers. So what are some solutions for communication? We might need to use an attention cue for a student, tapping a desk, saying their name. It could also just being in their space so that you can get their attention. Keep your language concise and simple. Sometimes less is more, especially when talking with students with autism and giving directions. You might want to pair a visual with those directions as well, such as if you want the student to turn to page 4 in a book, just write the number 4 somewhere on their desk so that now they know or they can remember which page to go to. Along with this concise and simple language, it's maybe using some rubrics or checklists for that student so that they know what the sequence of activities are. We are very known in the education world to give rapid fire instructions and expect students to get it done very quickly. Well, for a student with autism, if you say, put away your pencil, get out your book, and turn it to page 4, they may have only heard the last thing that you said, which was page 4. They may not know what book to pull out. They may have forgotten to put the pencil away. So having some type of visual directions might help them remember all the steps that you wanted them to take. Have the student paraphrase what you asked them to do to demonstrate their understanding. Again, we sometimes give very rapid fire directions where we've asked a complex question, but the student might need additional wait time to process that question or the request in order to complete it. And so if you ask the student to repeat back or to paraphrase, then that might hold their attention a little bit longer to get them to complete that task. Break down the components or the tasks into components. This goes back to task analysis that we talked about earlier. If you've asked a student to do something along with that rubric or checklist, you really have to think about breaking it down to its core components. Think about washing your hands and how many steps go into washing your hands, all the way from turning on the knobs to getting a paper towel and throwing it away. There are a lot of steps within that one task. The use of visual supports. Visual supports, again, do not have to be pictures. They can also be written words for the readers in our group. So when you think about visual supports, they can be as simple as a communication board, such as a first then board that we often see in our preschool and elementary classrooms. That's something that even our high schoolers and middle schoolers might still need, is a first then. Complete this first, then you do this activity. Oftentimes when we think about visual supports, we think about using a board maker or symbol sticks or even simple pictures off of the internet to communicate what we want a student to do as a request and how we want them also to respond. Remember, we don't always want to have visuals just for our requests, but they also need to have visual supports so that they can respond to our requests. Then we get into assistive technology. And assistive technology, when we're thinking about communication, we're thinking about possibly an iPad that might have a program on it, such as Sonoflex, My First AAC, Touch Chat, Proloquo to Go. Those are very common products that people purchase for assistive technology. We also have designated devices for assistive technology, such as Tobii communication systems, where the device is only for communication. When we talk about using an iPad for communication, this is something I would like to stress because I still see it in districts and across the state, is that if we're going to be using an iPad for communication, it really should be just for communication. You should put a lock on that communication app so that is the only thing that the student can access. If you would like an iPad so they can access other apps to help them throughout their day or learning programs, there really should be a separate iPad for that. If we're using iPads for communication, it should be designated just for communication. And that's simply, again, using another visual support of having a different color box on the iPad or protector for that iPad so they know that that is their communication iPad. And then we have, with the use of assistive technology and visual supports, we also have something that's more social. When we think about communication, it's not just that expressive and receptive language, but it's also understanding language. And there's something called the hidden curriculum, which I know a lot of the intervention specialists probably know about, but maybe not gen ed teachers. In hidden curriculum, it's really everything you've learned that you were never directly taught. I mean, if you think about that, that would be a lot of things that you do throughout your day that you were never directly taught. It consists of the unwritten rules and expectations that you kind of gain from your environment rather than being directly taught. And so think of a couple examples. If you think about a birthday party, you're generally not directly told, don't open those presents because you're not the birthday boy. You just know those aren't yours, and so you don't open them. Well, a student with autism who might enjoy opening gifts might think, oh, those are for anybody to open. Think about blowing out the candles on the cake. Again, that's for the birthday boy or birthday girl. But let's say you have a student who really does love to blow out candles. They might think that that's really cool, and they're going to go up and do that anyways. Think about bathrooms. Lots of hidden curriculum in bathrooms, such as, not standing too close, not looking at one another, especially in a boys' restroom. There's just a lot of hidden curriculum out there that we really need to think through for our students and how we can directly teach those expectations to them. Now we're going to talk about emotional regulation. The stressors of a typical school day are only compounded for a student with autism. They often struggle with emotional self-regulation, which is the ability to moderate feelings in situations that provoke intense reactions. Think about walking across a lunchroom and having to regulate yourself in that environment as a student with autism. Think about the noises, the smells, having to have chit chat at the table, somebody asking you to swap a sandwich that you really don't want to swap. That can be very panic inducing for a student with autism who doesn't know how to emotionally regulate themselves. Emotional regulation is one of the components of executive functioning, which we talked about earlier, because it includes things like planning, attention, and flexibility, essentially all the steps you take to manage your everyday behavior. What people don't think about is that those students have a lot of that planning that they do in their head, and then they have to make that decision of what is my reaction going to be? And oftentimes the easier reaction is just to act out. Emotional regulation in particular involves the ability to recognize a felt emotional state, which means that you have to first understand how you're feeling. Then you have to evaluate the repercussions of reacting. So choice A, choice B in my head, which one gives a positive outcome for everyone, not just me? And then also you have to make the conscious choice to move towards that reaction that you've chosen. So now you have to follow it through. This can be very challenging for our students with autism. With the multi-step emotional skills, that you have to have in place, we really have to break down what emotional regulation is. And so, what does it look like in the classroom? It looks like problems with recognizing their own feelings, having high anxiety levels. And anxiety is something we're going to talk about in the next slide because many of our students do have anxiety. And then how to control some of those challenging behaviors that come from the lack of having self-regulation. So some things that we can do is just speaking in a calm, relaxed voice. Remember, as students amp up, we also get amped up. Think about a student who might be yelling at you or throwing things at you. We are still the adults in the room, and we still have to try to be calm and use a relaxed voice that hopefully we emulate what we want the student to do in return. It's being that model. We also want to give facts in an unemotional tone of voice. Oftentimes, if you just answer the question or tell them what to do directly, they may calm down. Remember, we talked about in the communication slide just a minute ago how less is more when we're using communication with a student with autism. Giving those facts, can you pair it with a visual? Because as students get ramped up, or anyone gets ramped up, your communication level goes down at least one. So you start sounding more like Charlie Brown's teacher, right? So make sure that you just give them the facts and use that calm tone of voice. Model positive acceptance. What does that mean? That means giving positive choices to the student and being positive about it yourself. Don't make it sound like a negative, even though one of them may be negative, of take a walk down the hallway and see the principal. Well, no, let's walk down the hallway so we get out of the classroom and out of the situation. Let's use home base, which we talked about earlier as well, something within the classroom. Offer that student some choices that you can help them regulate that emotion. So just model that positiveness. Do you see a theme here? As a teacher, you need to be positive and you need to be calm when working with a student with autism who is starting to ramp up. The one thing that we definitely need to be doing is explicitly teaching emotions to our students. So one of those things is called a feeling wheel, which you do have one linked within your agenda, and here's another one here. Google it, you will find lots of emotional wheels, feeling wheels from elementary to high school. And basically what we're talking about is expanding the vocabulary of our students as well. So, when you ask a student, how are you feeling today? I feel mad, sad, glad, happy. They have these very basic feeling words, but is that truly how they feel? We might need to dig a little deeper. Think about maybe a student who says that they're scared. Well, why are you scared? Is it because you're anxious? Or you have a student that says they're sad. Well, why are they sad? Is it because they're lonely? There's a lot of reasons why a student could be sad. Maybe it's just that they're lonely. Maybe there's a student that's very happy. Well, why are you happy today? They might be very proud of something that they've just done. So we need to really teach those explicit words and vocabulary that goes along with emotions, and also having students understand those emotions. And that's when we get into this last one, which is teaching self-regulation. There are 3 programs, if you want to call them that are very popular that I see in many districts, and those are Power Cards, the Incredible 5-Point Scale, and Zones of Regulation. All 3 of these really has a student not only identify through vocabulary what their emotions are, but also what it looks like, what it feels like. And then also giving them strategies to either ramp themselves up or calm themselves down. I will say that at Hopewell, we have our occupational therapists who do a wonderful training about zones of regulation. And then I also have a training about the Incredible 5-Point Scale. Power cards, again, these are all linked within your agenda. These are very simple tools to use that you can develop on the spot. To give you an example of a power card, I had a student who, with autism, who would get very ramped up, had a great relationship with his dad. So his dad took a couple pictures of himself, and then on the back of the picture, he had positive statements like, today I'm having a good day. Today I'm going to make positive choices. When I get upset, and then he would have some choices of things he could do when he got upset. So on the front would be the picture, and on the back was basically his dad talking to him. And so we would pull that out and say, hey, look at what your dad told you to do and to remember to do today. And he would flip it over and read it. The Incredible 5-Point Scale and Zones of Regulation, both of those are very visually based. And that's great for our students with autism because they have strengths in visual materials, visual supports. And so both of those really do teach about how does it feel, how are you feeling in a moment, and how do you respond to that. So again, both of those programs, they kind of look similar, but very different. Those are things that I would look into as well if you want to look at teaching emotional regulation for our students with autism. The last characteristic that I would like to talk about is anxiety. Anxiety is something that you don't typically see as a separate category when you're looking at characteristics of autism, but I think it's important because it plays off of many of the other characteristics we've just talked about, such as communication, self-regulation, sensory. All of these things play into anxiety for our students. So the general population has about an 18% diagnosis rate of an actual anxiety disorder. When we look at autism specifically, the research shows around 40% of people with autism have a diagnosable anxiety disorder. So, I mean, that's a 100% difference. That's double the normal population. And so we really need to think about that with our students with autism and how we can reduce anxiety. Think about some of the problems that might cause a student with autism to be anxious. Task demands, how much work do I need to do? How long do I have to do it? Am I missing a skill in order to complete that task that I don't already have in my tool belt? Social challenges that go along with that communication component. How do I socially manage my environment? I'm walking into a room and I don't know anybody. My anxiety level is now through the roof. The environment that you're walking into. Think about walking into a classroom and all the sensory components that are in there. Is it too loud? Are there too many things on the walls? I really like polar bears, and there's a poster on the wall of a polar bear, and that's all I ever stare at. So the environment itself needs to be managed. And then those challenging behaviors that come from that lack of self-regulation. So how can I make positive choices and having that anxiety in the back of my head of saying, am I making the right choice constantly? So some solutions to help decrease anxiety in our students is really assessing the demands of the student when planning your schedule. If you know that math is the challenging area for the student, don't wait till the end of the day because now they've spent all day worrying about math class. Get it out of the way in the morning. If that's when they work best, try to get that math class in the morning. Think about teaching new concepts to students. Is it better to do in a small group or in the larger group? Does the student need to be pulled to the hallway if they're on an IEP and maybe work with someone individually? Just think about how you can make that schedule so it meets the student's need. And that goes straight into incorporating a balance of low stress, high pleasure activities for that individual. If you know math class is a struggle, you get through math class and then you provide a very low stress, high pleasure activity for that student. So it might be sending them to home base so that they can listen to some music, or maybe it's giving them a coloring sheet so that they can color because that's something they enjoy. It needs to be something that is not going to cause them any distress because they just came from a stressful situation. So it's really called balancing the agenda, making sure that you're doing um, high demand tasks and then offering that low stress solution at the end. And make sure the student knows that it's coming. You could have a visual support in front of them showing a set of headphones, or even the actual headphones could be sitting on the desk showing them as soon as you get done with math, we are going to move on to this more pleasurable activity. Incorporate stress-free time to that schedule. This is, again, it doesn't go with the low stress, high stress situation. This is just free time in the day so that they know that they're going to get time to do whatever they need to do. Some of our students like to STEM, which is jumping around. So maybe they need a trampoline or something. Knowing that they're going to have that time coming up within their day. They do all need that stress-free time. A lot of our typical students, they look forward to recess or they look forward to lunch, a time when they don't have a teacher talking to them and they can just run around and be with their friends. For our students with autism, that is not stress-free time because they want structure, or maybe they don't know what to do during that time. They don't want to have a conversation. And so that's why often we see students out at recess just pacing back and forth because they really don't know what to do at that time. But it is stress-free for them if they're allowed to, like I said, STEM, or if you give them something enjoyable to do during that time. But again, that recess and lunch, that's not necessarily a stress-free time for our students with autism. So you might have to incorporate some of that time for them individually in the schedule. Incorporate special interests into the assignments. This also goes down to the very last one, use students' interests to engage them. There is a book out there called Just Give Him the Whale by Paula Cluth. I believe the link is in your Google Doc. It's a great book that talks about 20 strategies on how to use what she calls enthusiasms. Some people say that students with autism get fixated on certain subjects or certain content areas. Well, she calls them fascinations. And so let's play to those special interests. If the student likes whales, get some stickers, throw them on a paper, and that student might be more engaged in that paper because it has a picture of a whale on it. So using those special interests to help calm them. You can also make occupational therapy prescribed de-stressing, learning, and calming activities available throughout the day. And again, that goes back to a sensory diet or using a sensory room that we talked about at the very beginning of this training. But again, you want to make sure you're working with an occupational therapist at all possible, because you want to make sure that if they need something calming, they're doing a calming activity and not something that's going to ramp them up again. Next, we're going to show you just a short video about a girl named Tessa and her anxiety that she experiences throughout the day, and then also what were some of the solutions the district put into place for her.
So, any questions about what we're doing here? All right.
When Tess was 3.5, we had her diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder.
I was saying.
More specifically, it was called pervasive developmental delay, PDD.
Oh, cool. Let's go do that.
I'm Mary Beth Marsden. I'm Tess's mom.
You say I can't make any sense in this.
The biggest problem over the past couple of years since she's been in school is school.
Can you read that for me?
All right. Explain how the tail supports an important idea in the article.
Calm down. Want to take a break?
And anytime the work gets really hard, and anytime she thinks she can't master it, when she's pushed to do it, she pushes back.
Wait, why did I read that again? I've already read that.
No, I just want you to write it so I can write it on the paper for you.
Fine.
Remember?
Do I have to write it all over again?
No, just one time.
Oh, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
I see Tess's biggest issue being her anxiety towards failure. My name is Sarah Kamarmi, and I am a special educator at Chatsworth.
Wow, did you hear that, Tess?
What we're doing with Tess is she's on a reinforcement break schedule.
Let's see what's the question? List 5 things you have.
I know that.
I targeted 3 behaviors that we really needed to sort of rein in.
I will listen to my teacher, I will complete my classwork, I will use the talking points.
Every 10 minutes, if she's able to do those 3 things, she gets a star. And every 3 stars, she gets to take a preferred break.
Do I have all 3 stars?
Yes, ma'am, you have earned your last star.
Yes.
I'm Toria Campbell. I'm Tess's aide. She has 3 stars at the end of the 30 minutes. She earns a 5-minute break, and she's able to choose from 7 or 8 different treats, as she calls them, treats or prizes.
Can I take my break now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
5-minute break.
We're taking our first break. Follow me.
Especially for kids on the spectrum. They need to be motivated. We have to think outside the box for them.
Miss K actually wants you to do your DS right now. Just so we won't interrupt. Is that okay? All right.
Tess is not a person that's motivated by grades. She's not motivated by the social piece, which is huge for kids at her age.
You take your time, and if you get frustrated, we have to turn the game off. We'll pause it.
Whoa, that's not supposed to happen either.
That social piece, a lot of typical kids get their breaks that way. For our kids that aren't really motivated by social experience, going to lunch is more stressful than it is a pleasure.
That's a good idea.
Having breaks for our kids on the spectrum is huge.
Well, I always calm down. And my favorite break is DS.
And it keeps her motivated. I definitely believe that.
Her time in class is way up. Her overall aura when she comes to school is a lot better. She doesn't walk down the hall with a look of dread on her face. She's more excited. We made school fun.
Acre. Thank you.
You did a great job, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
So I just want to thank you for taking time to learn about autism today and some of the tools, resources, and strategies that you can use within your classroom. The resources below are where I pulled a lot of the information from for this presentation today, so feel free to give any of those a look. You also have direct linked resources, and the videos are in your Google Doc where you can get some very specific information on specific items. Also within that Google Doc, I'd asked you to take some notes and to jot down a few of the strategies, tools, or resources you could implement yourself this school year. I'd like you to really think about choosing 1 to 2 of those and think about a student that you may have that might benefit from one of these resources or strategies. It may not even be a student with autism. It might be any student in your classroom who might be struggling in one of the areas we talked about today. Remember, when you're implementing something new and you're wanting a change in behavior, it doesn't happen overnight. It may take quite some time for the student to respond to the intervention that you put into place. So whatever you choose, please don't give up on it right away. Give it some time to work, and hopefully you all have a wonderful school year. Thank you.